Fabulous. All right, we are good to go. Let's take a look. I had one person message me, say they couldn't get in. So we'll get them started in a second. But I want to go ahead and get started, introduce another amazing speaker that we have on today. We have Marilyn Hoosen with Merrill Lynch. She is a financial services veteran, more than 12 years at Merrill, working in corporate entrepreneurship, individuals and family clients to help them achieve their financial goals. She holds her Series 6 or Series 7, 63, 65 FINRA registrations, as well as the Virginia Life and Annuities insurance licenses. She writes a quarterly column for a magazine in finance and investments and a graduate of Howard University. She completed all the coursework for her MBA in finance as well and holds an MA in African Studies. Development and policy and a BS in psychology. And so Marilyn served as the past president of the Annandale Chamber of Commerce in Annandale, Virginia, and had been a director on the Chamber's board for 9 years. So I just want to go ahead and welcome Marilyn and get the program started for the night. As always, we have great professionals that are here to share their knowledge, share how we can become even better and stronger in our financial lives. So I want to turn it over to Marilyn.
Thank you.
Get started.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, first of all, to Rosalyn and to Black Women in Pursuit of Financial Independence for opening up the space for us to have a really substantive conversation this evening around our personal relationship to money. In the area of investing, this is a developing and growing sector where it seems to integrate the study of both finance as well as psychology, because what we have learned is that when we look at the way in which we interface with our finances, it is no longer considered just a narrow purview looking at dollars and cents, cash inflows and cash outflows, assets and liabilities. It is a much more intentional, both conscious and subconscious relationship based on what we may have brought into our adult lives from our childhood experiences around money, what we may have inherited under a study called epigenetics, meaning how the transfer of certain habits are actually imprinted into the very DNA of a family that could impact 7 successive generations following that first generation's behaviors from a nurture standpoint, but it actually becomes embedded in nature because it begins to be encoded in your DNA's very expression. And so how these childhood experiences and money habits sort of seep in subconsciously into our minds by watching how our parents and other elders deal with money has a long-lasting effect on how we too then as adults will deal with our finances. So a really great example is when we look at single-headed households, and we also look at dual-headed households, the patterns that each individual parent or adult in the household approaches their financial life, whether we're talking about balancing a checkbook, shopping and purchasing decisions, both online and in person, loan applications, looking at life insurance, looking at medical care, and a host of others, including retirement, that making those decisions have a lot of emotional undergirding that seems to inform where we go with our money and how we then deal with it. What we have noticed is that oftentimes when we look at our financial lives, we think of them as separate compartments, almost like looking at different files in a file drawer. But your financial life is really much more of an integrated process, meaning that what happens with one area of your finance has an impact on every other area. And so synergistically, decisions that you therefore make about one area would have an effect on the outcome of each of the other parts, but also on the whole. And you look at where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow. So when we start to talk about the behaviors that we exhibit and therefore pass down to our children, a lot of times it is one in which you could fall ideally, and for the purposes of keeping the discussion simple, into one of two categories. Either you're a spender or you're a saver. It is very hard and very rare to find someone who sort of has aspects of both, right? If you have traditionally been a saver, you might be a person who tends toward couponing, extreme couponing, looking for discounts and deals where you can find them, checking clearance racks and so forth. If you are a spender, you tend to pay full price and really don't care about where you might be able to save $1 or more. And so sometimes it's best to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about through using real life examples. I remember very clearly, and I think I shared this example with Rosalyn, of a couple that I had met with when I had a previous iteration of my career with BB&T. When I met with this couple, the husband came in first and said to me, I don't know how to handle the family finances when dealing with my wife's spending proclivities, right? And so I said, well, let's set up a joint meeting where both you and your spouse come in and we can talk through the issues. So at this point, I'm no longer really the private banker. I'm really the psychologist and maybe the marriage counselor, right? So the missus comes in, and there is about a 10-year age gap between the husband and the wife. And what we found was that it didn't matter what income came into the checking account at the end of every month, they found themselves in overdraft. So for example, on average, the family income was about $15,000. Somehow the wife was able to spend $15,500, $15,800, $15,100 in any given month. And so the husband said, I'm at my wit's end. I feel that she is undermining our family's long-term financial security. I like to save. I like to look for the cheapest, best value I can find, whereas my wife could care less about the price tag, right? And so I asked her, the missus, some questions around this, and she said, you know, life is short, right? It was the YOLO approach. Let me go and live my best life and make sure everybody else around me is happy, right? So for example, he said that, you know, at the end of one really exhaustive month, he decided to cut up all of their credit cards. And so she outsmarted him, went into Target. Who knew Target offers you a card that is not just a store credit card, but is actually a Visa? And so within 1 day of getting approved, she had racked up $1,500 in charges. She had asked her husband to take out a $100,000 home equity line of credit to give her daughter the bat mitzvah of her dreams. And so going into debt to save face in society, it all came down to her using retail purchases, out of control spending to fill a deeper emotional hole. And when I started peeling away at the layers, it turned out that when she was very young, her parents were divorced. Her dad was extremely wealthy, owned one of the largest law firms in Baltimore. But every time she needed something, dad would throw money at her. And so what she learned was no matter how down I might be feeling, if I just go and buy something, it makes me feel better. And so that kind of learned behavior where her dad taught her that money and spending solve your emotional deficits is something she carried into wifehood and into motherhood. Her husband, on the other hand, who was 10 years her senior, had retired at this point. And he said, Marilyn, we cannot continue to do this because we have two teenagers that we're still going to have to put through college. We're still going to have to look at least 30 years in retirement for me and maybe 40 years for my wife in retirement. And we'll need our retirement assets to stretch through the course of our life expectancy. And so, coming to me at this stage where after 20 years of this kind of behavior in marriage would take a lot of heavy lifting to be able to change the outcomes for this family and really change the daily, the weekly, and the monthly habits. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go out and have a separate meeting with the wife only and we can talk through it. And so I did that. Um, Turns out all she wanted to talk about was when can we go shopping together? there was there was just like with any other addiction, unless the person themselves is willing to change, to interrupt the pattern, you're never going to see a wholehearted, devoted, and motivated person wanting to see their family's financial wealth really grow and become healthier, right? And so there was very little I could do for this couple because as long as the missus was not interested in changing her habits, it was never going to create meaningful discipline change for the family. And so as a last resort, I said to the husband, I would ordinarily not recommend this, but I think you need to set up a shadow account, right? You need to start siphoning off something at the beginning of the month or whenever the income hits the account to be able to set up some kind of safety net for your family and for your children. So that's a very egregious example of perhaps something going awry in a family and it festering for decades. What I have learned in other positive examples is that if you can begin to teach your children at a young age by sitting with them at the kitchen table, maybe on a weekly basis, going through how the family budgets, how the family allots all of the income that comes in towards the living expenses, towards short, intermediate, and long-term goals, and then seeing what the excess left over is that might be considered your mad money account, you are instilling behavioral patterns in that child that they will carry with them then into adulthood. The other ways in which I see this show up is in the actual investment portfolios of clients who have inherited assets from their parents. And so I had another client who had gotten 3 very large positions in 3 stocks from her dad. And these were considered sacred cows in her eyes. She was very reluctant at first for us to diversify away from these 3 highly concentrated positions that each were worth about a couple of $100,000 a piece. So on the one hand, you say, well, high risk, high reward. On the other hand, there is a thing called calculated risk, right? Which we try to manage by diversifying a portfolio away from very strongly concentrated positions. It took a few years for me to do so, but she is really glad that we began that process and continue to do so to this day, because what she has noticed is that the power in diversifying away from concentrated positions are that you are able to mitigate risks affiliated with a bad headline risk story about a particular company that you may have overweighted exposure to. And so there are some clients and some individuals that are willing to learn in this process of financial literacy to arm yourselves into finding the most optimal ways of creating habits that will deliver favorable outcomes, desirable outcomes for you, as opposed to sort of stumbling into and around your financial independence aspirations without any real game plan. The other thing I'd like to talk about is in the context specifically as it relates to Black women, right? What we know is that we as Black women are oftentimes the backbone of our family, whether we're talking about being the place that everybody comes to, particularly as professional Black women. If the family has a death or a birth or a marriage or a graduation, if you are the first person perhaps who has gone to college in the family, the first one to have ascended up the corporate ladder or has a very successful business of your own, oftentimes you are the first go-to person that everybody comes to when the family hits a financial wall, right? And so oftentimes Black women are torn because you want to be a contributory, helpful member of the family to help solve financial crises. But you're also oftentimes doing that at the expense of your own personal well-being and your own personal financial success. And so how do you balance these competing and conflicting priorities? You take into account the fact that as it stands today, the most educated demographic in America are African American women. The most educated immigrant group in America are Nigerians. So we have Black women both that have been born here in this country and perhaps born abroad that fit that demographic. And so we have been taught that if you just pursue education, that that is the lever to take you out of poverty and into financial success, right? That typically would seem like the straight linear path toward financial security. However, we as Black women know that that has not always been the case. And so enter institutional racism and so forth. Other studies have shown that while we may be equal or superior in terms of our education levels, it has not necessarily meant a commensurate increase in our incomes and in our net worth, right? And so this is a very disruptive period that we're finding ourselves in as a country right now, because it is a long overdue conversation that the country needs to have. But in the midst of all of this, Black women have steadily occupied a position in middle management in corporations where we are the #1 demographic, believe it or not, that occupy middle management roles in the country. Typically, senior management and board of directors are occupied by white males. And what has happened with white women is there has been this perception that because white women tend to be considered more eligible to get married and enter into dual-headed households, if they're going to start a family, they end up having to leave the workforce in maternity leave and sometimes may never re-enter the workforce again. And so if a company were to invest dollars into the training, the development, the growth of that person as an employee, their return on investment might be shortchanged because there is a likelihood that this person, once they've worked there a couple of years and decide to start a family, may not come back. And so the bet on Black women is that oftentimes we have a higher rate of being single. We therefore may not pose as much of a risk, quote unquote, to leave the workforce. Even if we become single mothers, there is an incentive to return back to work because we are also the breadwinners in our families. And so this is some of the contributing factors that have led to us seeing statistically that Black women occupy middle management positions. Interestingly, Black women are also the group that are developing the fastest growing entrepreneurship endeavors in America, right? And while we know that 95% of all startups tend to fail, what we have found that with Black women, it becomes especially egregious because we tend to have narrower paths to accessing capital. And what I mean by that is oftentimes banks will look upon us in a different way when assessing our loan credit profile than they may a counterpart from another demographic, right? And so finding ways to fundraise to be able to support our starting businesses has often been a huge impediment to the sustainability of our businesses. We think that with organizations like the CFPB and others, with increased scrutiny of how and to whom financial institutions extend loans, that this dynamic might change, and statistically we may see Black businesses begin to find more avenues of capital to be able to support their businesses. But even so, whether we're talking about being an employee in another person's organization or starting and growing your own business, the dynamics for us as a demographic continue to remain the same. And so some of those factors are outside of our control. So we have to come back and ask ourselves, well, what things are in my personal control that I can change? And the thing that we always come back to is having a systematized financial disciplined program where no matter what comes in, you ensure that you set aside funds to be able to feed different beasts, if you will. The long-time retirement security, maybe education for your children, maybe healthcare expenses that may come down the road for you. And then looking at if you've got other side ventures that you would want to entertain, right? And so all of those things, all of those aspects of what affects us as Black women, as Black professional women, are important aspects to consider when we're looking at what our personal relationship to money is. It's a daunting task because historically, we have seen that the racial wealth gap has dictated that the net worth of African Americans and African American women in particular are fractions of what it is for your typical Caucasian family. So for example, in the District of Columbia for 2017 alone, it was calculated that the average net worth of a white DC resident was 85 times greater than that of a Black DC resident. And that Black people would not be able to meet a financial emergency in excess of $400 if it came up in an unpredicted way. And so, you know, as we sit in the context of what the socio-political and economic realities are, we still have to be able to figure out, well, knowing that this is the backdrop, how then do I implement certain practices, certain money habits that might move me forward and therefore raise all of my family's financial wealth? So, you know, I would ask each of you, I would challenge each of you to go back and look at your own childhood and say to yourself, well, what did I learn as a kid about money? How did I begin to formulate in college and in my early childhood, my early adulthood, how and what I would do when I got money? So whether we're talking about, you know, being susceptible to credit cards in college, being saddled with student loan debt upon graduation, not really having the funds to be able to do a down payment on your first home upon graduation, how those personal financial behaviors and realities may have impacted where you find yourself at today. But once you've done that audit, that curation of what happened in terms of financial decisions that you made along the path, start to ask yourself the next question, which is, what can I do today to change that? How can I change the way that I make decisions about what I do with the money that I have? Some of those decisions are going to be difficult. It may mean having to tell extended family members sometimes no, and that's a very difficult thing to navigate because it tugs at your heartstrings, right? But it may also mean, what kinds of skills do I need to retool myself with to be able to make myself, either as an employee or a business owner, more marketable, right? What other habits can I incorporate when it comes to wanting to put my best foot forward in terms of looking the part, right? Versus actually living the reality of what my true financial situation is. And in our community, it is taboo to talk with extended family about our finances. It is something that we see as shameful, when in fact, it could be beneficial to everybody to bring things, you know, out from their hidden places into the light and to talk about what the impact of that has been on our family finances, but also what we could do together to change our outcomes. We know that in some communities, because they have taken this open approach to finances within their groups, they've been able to share between and among each other in certain financial circles, whether they are investment clubs or business circles where everybody pools money together as a group to then help specific member in that group the following month or the following year to start a business, to grow a business, to patronize a business, and or to buy a home, to buy a venture, a building, an apartment building, whatever those groups consensus are around helping their community. It is one in which all of them then begin to benefit from. So start to think about what could you do to expand both your circle by starting, first of all, with being more open about your finances with people that you trust and want to build with. Also start to think about what other financial streams of income you can begin to open up, whether you do it by yourself or in the context of building in a group setting with others, right? So one quick example, there's a young boy who's, I think he's 9 years old at this point, decided he was going to start a YouTube channel. His name is Ryan. And this YouTube channel was simply about opening up presents. I know it sounds simplistic, but it has been such a huge success for him and for his parents that he has delved into a whole new set of opportunities that would never have come about if he and his parents didn't start this little one YouTube channel with him opening up presents and then giving his own review of that, right? So it's a very small example, but as we move deeper into the 21st century, having at our disposal social media and the internet to be able to build dynamic, malleable businesses that could create an additional stream of income to us. It all starts with the behavior, with the mindset as to, I know I've got financial goals, and these are the goals that I'm going to work towards. These are the strategies I'm going to harness to be able to deliver better outcomes for me. There's a lot more I could say, but I'm going to leave it at that because I want to open up the floor for us to have more dynamic conversations and interactions with each other. And I'm also going to say this, if you have a question that is mulling around in your mind, please ask it, shoot your shot, because oftentimes there are others thinking the same thing and we can all stand to benefit from it. So with that, Rosalyn, I'd like to open it up to, take any questions that anybody has.
Well, perfect. Yes, definitely. And there's a bit of conversation just going on the Facebook page. Okay. Someone said choices are weighted much more heavily. Most of us have had, or we have no room for financial error. And I think that's so key. I mean, many of us, if you're first generation to go to college, you can't waste the money. Or if you're the first person to be in a professional career, so many risks that other people take, we just simply can't. I know there was an article that really talked simply about the ability for people to take on things like unpaid internships, which may give you a great, upper hand in your career. But of course, if you need the money in order to live and you don't have someone else to kind of take care of that, it changes your direction, and it definitely pivots in terms of the decisions that you can actually make. Yeah. But that goes to show, I mean, we both came from being private bankers, and it's one of those things when we talk about people who are truly wealthy versus people who make a lot of money. And so you mentioned the couple that makes a lot of money wouldn't necessarily be what we consider to be wealthy. Yes. What are some of those like foundational mistakes that people are making? I mean, definitely it's their relationship with money and how they view saving versus spending, but what are some of those other kind of foundational mistakes that people are making?
One of them I had mentioned, which is that you become the go-to person in the family every time a financial crisis hits, right? Because you are the one that did make it. And how you sort of balance and navigate that is to begin to make yourself a priority. I know it sounds selfish, and I know that that is not a cultural community value, because we are raised to say and to believe that if you have it, you share that with everybody, right? And so I would say split the difference down the middle. Perhaps one of the solutions to that is, instead of giving 100% to other competing priorities, give half of that. And particularly if you don't have any room for financial errors, think of it as cutting off your nose to sort of spite your face, right? You might help to plug holes today using that analogy of giving someone a fish for the day, as opposed to saying, how do I build long-term security so that I have fish tomorrow and next year and 10 years from now? So, it's really interesting. I do not subscribe to the belief that I can't, right? I believe that because we find ourselves in a world today where there are, first of all, so much more information around how you can build additional streams of income without upsetting the apple cart with your day job, or what's coming in and what's going out in terms of your regular living expenses. The best example I can think of is the woman who started the Pampered Chef, right? She and her husband were both working parents. They had bills, and every dollar that came into the family's financial coffers was already spoken for. And so there was no excess money on the side for her or him to be able to start anything else that opens up an additional source of income, right? And so she looked at some old life insurance policy, wasn't very large, but it had a cash value attached to it. Ordinarily and prudently as a financial advisor, I would never tell somebody to use cash value in a life insurance policy as a place of first resort to tap into to borrow against. But since she recognized that there was no money that was coming into the household that she could use to start this outside venture, she rolled the dice and said, let me take this cash value on the side. Someone else might say, I've got a little 401k at work. I know that 401k loans exist. Again, not an ideal place to tap because the interest rates, both in the loans against cash value tapped in a life insurance policy or 401k plans, are ideal. They are usually higher than what a loan on a mortgage would be, or a home equity line of credit. But if you have no other source and you look at it not as an additional debt or burden, but as an investment in yourself, that might be a source that you can tap, because I know there is the ability to take a percentage and borrow against a plan that you have in retirement, not IRAs, but strictly 401ks. If you have an idea and have done your market research on bringing something to the marketplace, whether it is, making earrings that you could sell on Etsy, or becoming a seller on Amazon's marketplace, or, starting your own YouTube channel. Think outside of the traditional confines of what you do in your 9-to-5 job that can open up a window for you that you can tap as your seed capital. Because even if you went to a bank to try to borrow money, they want to know that you've got skin in the game too. In other words, what are you bringing to the table, and what is your portion of the risk that we would take to give you the capital to start an outside business? So I would challenge you to think outside of the norms, outside of the barriers that have been set for you, as to how you can change your financial situation and therefore change the outcomes that you would deem as favorable. I hope that was helpful.
I definitely, because I think we have a number of ladies within the group that have something on the side that they're doing in order to generate income. We had a great speaker a few weeks ago talking about legitimizing your business. So oftentimes we're doing this side business, whether it's, doing hair in the house, or you're selling XYZ, but you really haven't legitimized the business to get us to the point where, the PPP loan comes about and you can take advantage of these products and services and so forth. So in terms of accessing capital, I think sometimes immediately people go to, if I have cash value, or maybe liquidate a 401k plan and so forth. What are some of the better ideas in terms of a process of getting capital or raising capital? It's definitely very different depending on what you're doing and how much capital you need. But I do know that oftentimes we start to use our own funds first, and then we need to take that next step, or we need to grow, or we need to sustain our business through a time like today that we're in. The cash is kind of depleted. So what are some better avenues that people can utilize there?
I'll start with what I don't want you to do. Definitely don't liquidate your 401k, right? You could perhaps take a loan, but sure, it's not ideal. something I mentioned earlier about forming a club, a community of women, either at your church or women in your social group, your sorority, women that you work out with, a group of women that are like-minded about seeing all of you succeed. And by the way, it starts with that fundamental value where everybody's rooting for everybody. You definitely don't want to surround yourself with a group of people that are not necessarily interested in seeing you do well, right? So think about that as an organizing value or principle. But if you were to able to link up forces where maybe each of you have your own separate idea, or you have a combined idea of what you all would want to accomplish together. So I know in Baltimore, there's a group of young Black individuals that got together. They were all like-minded. Some of them had real estate licenses, others did not. But they all took a little bit of money and put it together, which gave them a larger pile of money from which to start, and decided to then approach a bank together to be able to get an additional set of capital in the form of some kind of loan, and have started to buy up undervalued properties in Baltimore together to build a real estate investment portfolio that all of them have an equal stake in the business as every other member of the group. By doing that, they have instantly changed not only their ideas around what is achievable, but they are actually working a plan and using strategies where they can come together as a group to be able to advance that goal. The other things I mentioned, look around and, if you talk about legitimizing your business, I would say it is not prohibitive to look at what your state's cost would be to set up an LLC. So everybody sort of thinks about, well, I want to start a business, but I'm not sure what the steps are. There's a beautiful website called llcuniversity.com. Not only does this particular website serve as a repository of information, it actually provides the links for you to each and every state in the union that you can click on, go and see what the cost structure is, which is typically between $50 to $100 per year that you can write off once the LLC is incorporated. That allows you to establish an LLC. It helps you to get an IRS tax ID number within 24 hours. So now you've not only got a legitimate business, you also have a tax ID that is separate from your personal social security number under which this business is organized. And then it also gives you links to certain domains where you can patent or trademark whatever name you give your LLC. And then I would say go the second step, which is investigate GoDaddy.com or Wix.com. And again, it's $140 or something for the year for you to be able to set up a website where you can sell your product or your service on. So if you think about either doing it in a group or by yourself, do the research, legitimize your business by setting up an LLC, getting yourself a tax ID for that business, and then you put yourself in the game to be able to go after loans such as the PPP or whatever the Small Business Administration has available to you. I will tell you, each and every woman that is out there listening right now, the numbers of organizations in light of what's going on around Black Lives Matter that are willing to give you grants, not loans, to see Black startup businesses thrive. All you have to do is a simple Google search, but start by setting up this formal structure and then get yourself a website and you are off to the races. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, right? But if you stay within your comfort zone, you will not be able to expand the growth of what your wealth looks like. So again, start with llcuniversity.com, and once you've got all of that set up, go to both GoDaddy.com and Wix, do a price comparison, figure out what name you'd like to give your website and your presence, and then move forward from there to be able to sell whatever your product or service is in the marketplace.
I think that's huge. I mean, that whole collective economics, it makes a huge difference. I know we were talking in the group not too long ago in terms of, I think somebody brought up the susus, and unfortunately,
Yes.
like the not so susus that are existent right now. And so honestly, of sharing your idea, but I think sometimes we're afraid to share our idea because you're thinking someone's going to shoot it down. But oftentimes you might be sharing your idea with someone who says, that's my idea too. Or maybe it's you have a great idea and someone is just very good at implementation. So there's usually like a visionary and there's a person that makes things happen. And when those two people come together, they can really make things happen. And it might not necessarily be in your close circle, but definitely the networking, the community that we've created, the community, Eureka, of course, is one of our sponsors, so they assist. And so they have an entire community of business owners, of people that are in the business world as well. They're looking to help startups. But like you said, this is the moment. There are very few moments that we'll see that exist like today where people are saying, yes, I want to put money here, where Netflix is saying, I want to put $100 billion of cash into Black banks. And certain companies are saying, I'm allocating a certain amount of my money to go towards Black businesses. And I posted a little something about SBA and the women owned business certification. And so many people have abused it. But we are legitimately Black.
Yes. Well, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And sharing circles, even if you just form a group of advisors, your peers, your group that you want to bounce your ideas off of, who may not have the financial wherewithal or the time commitment to be able to join, but will certainly lend an ear for you to sit on the phone for 1 hour and talk through what your idea is, and then reciprocate that with them. That kind of emotional and mental support is just as important as well.
And it goes back, I say it, I probably say it every time we have one of these, about relationships and building relationships, building your team. So whether it be your banker, whether it be an advisor, whether it be someone on the tax side or someone on the legal side, of having, you may not think you're large enough to have an attorney. But oftentimes there are attorneys, especially right now, and they're donating time. And so if you can get an hour of their time and you have an attorney that's ready to go, because when you get that big contract, the last thing you want to have to do is start interviewing attorneys and figure out who you would like to work with. Or, you know, when you have that big year and you're making significant cash, the last thing you want to do is have to figure out, okay, now I have to find a CPA. And you're kind of struggling and brushing through that process. And I mean, my background, we're private bankers at BB&T, and definitely we've met with a number of clients who didn't necessarily qualify for our services. But like you said, that hour of conversation may be where you need to just be, to get you on the path to say, you know, change this, change that, start here. Because of course, to get wealthy, you're going to have to do a couple of things. You're going to have to do reducing expenses, growing your income, and figure out where to allocate those resources. And so you can grow that income through businesses, through, you know, hoping that you get enough raises at work. There's a number of different things. But
I would also add that, you know, there's a friend of mine who is going to be starting a Center for Entrepreneurial Finance with Bowie State, and I'm signing on as one of the instructors. But it is about this linchpin here that says you can have the best business plan in the world, you could have the best marketing strategy in the world, but without the seed capital, all of it is for naught, right? So when you start to think about entrepreneurial finance and what it is going to take, you know, think in terms of what other groups or organizations could I tap into? And I say it again, it starts with a simple Google search. You know, this is not 1920. We've got so much information at our disposal. There are a number of Black venture capitalist firms, Black private equity firms that are looking to support Black startups. So be assertive, you know, and take that first step. Once you create that initiative, you know, starting with whatever your vision is, I promise you, as you chip away one line after another, you're going to be able to put these building blocks together and learn so much along the way. And it will change the trajectory of your financial life for you and your family and all those generations to come after you. While I'm on that point, I'm so sorry. There's one other thing I want to talk about, and that is this phenomenon called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. There was a study conducted between the late 1800s and today. It was a family in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh used to be the industrial capital of the US long before New York, right? And what they did was they studied, let's say, 100 families that looked at what it was that within 3 generations, 95% of those families lost whatever family wealth was accumulated. And what we saw was generation 1 starts with rags, accumulates the wealth through some kind of business endeavor, sets up trust funds, does all of the right estate planning. Generation 2 spends it down, and by the time we get to generation 3, there is no longer any wealth left. So for 95 out of those 100 families, they did not spend wisely. They did not grow the family wealth wisely. And by the time it got to the 3rd generation, everything that was worked hard for in generation 1 was already squandered. So then we asked, okay, well, what did the other 5 families do that was so different from the first 95? And the changing factor was financial literacy and application of those financial principles in their lives. So arm yourself with the right information to ensure that not only do you not make missteps, but that the next 2, 3, 4 generations after you follow the same disciplined approach to your finances as well.
I think that's huge, because definitely I think many of the ladies in the group are 100% kind of that first generation. So we're creating that legacy. And if we're learning along the way as we create this legacy, what are some of the things, I mean, when we talk financial literacy, we're learning at the same time that we would teach the next generation. But in terms of structurally, what are some of the ways that the businesses that we're creating, that we're growing, that we make sure that it lasts 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations?
Well, the whole concept around financial literacy is understanding the science of money. How does it work? How do you take $1 and turn it into 10? And make sure that once you've gotten that 10, you continue to compound, grow it, as opposed to spending it down, right? So when we look at how does somebody in the position that many of the women are on this webinar today with, here you are, you're learning along the way, you're saying, okay, let me start with what my basic monthly budget looks like. Therein lies the very foundation of what your wealth will look like 10, 20 years from now. So when I'm sitting down with my clients and we go down this road, we start with the financial goals, right? And then we back into, okay, so the goals are the ideal that we are striving to achieve. Then we look at what your current financial situation looks like. That will help us to be able to determine how we get from where you are to where you want to be. That process, the connecting of that line from where you are to where you want to be, is where financial literacy and implementation or application take shape. So it starts with looking at what are my monthly cash inflows and cash outflows, and how can I impact that very basic task on a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly basis, and begin to find ways to optimize what's coming in and minimize what's going out. That is a very, very basic concept that could have lasting effects on you, right? So you start with the very basic budgeting. Then you start to look at, okay, am I participating at my place of work in a 401k? And if I am doing so, what percentage am I defraying into that? Because every dollar of match that my company gives is like giving myself a raise, right? So what can you maximize on a pre-tax basis to be able to put into your 401k? If you are a single startup business, set up a SEP IRA. It is like paying yourself in a tax-deferred manner, so that whatever is in there between the time that you start contributing and the time when you will start to need it in retirement grows tax-free. So start some kind of concrete contribution. And if you are making it right now, look at what you can do incrementally each year to increase your percentage of deferral until you hit the cap. Retirement plans through employers or through IRAs are the #1 way in which people can help to secure their financial success in retirement. The second thing is, if you don't already own a home, please start looking at ways in which to get a starter home. The difference between putting money away every single month into rent, which you will never recoup any kind of return on, versus investing in a home that you can build equity up with. And at some point, if there is enough equity in your home, that may end up being a place where you can tap excess dollars to be able to start a business on the side. But home ownership is the number one asset in the country. I know right now it's difficult because we've got a large unemployed group in the country, and by the end of this week, those benefits are going to go away. The moratorium on evictions and so forth and foreclosures will also possibly dissipate. I get that. But if you have been a renter and you've got the ability to go out and at least have enough to put down in some kind of loan product, whether it's an FHA loan or a traditional mortgage, prices of in places where homes are in that short sale foreclosure area might be an opportunity for you to acquire a primary residence or an investment property at an undervalued cost to yourself. So just start thinking, as you look at financial literacy, what are the different areas of my financial life that I can have control over, separate and apart from what happens with society or whether my employer decides to give me a raise or a promotion, separate and apart from whether or not the business set of customers I have are big enough today. How can I make certain changes that I have control over to be able to enhance my financial security?
I think that's a really good answer. And it's really foundational, of just kind of the basic steps, and then you grow from there.
Yes.
And so many of us have great ideas, and we want to be able to take that idea and make it come to fruition for something quite bigger. And I think it's possible. And so many of us are the first generation, maybe to go to college, to have that professional job, maybe to expand on a business, to have a business. So oftentimes, if you're leaning on your family, they probably just don't have really like work this, stable job, stay there forever, retire and so forth. But definitely things are different than how they were a number of years ago. And the opportunities have changed, and the way in which we can do things have changed, and the way in which we can get information, and just be so much more aware and protect ourselves so much more than what we have before. But like I said earlier, I think sometimes we're just kind of scared. And so I would say sometimes you'll share it with a family member and they say, why would you do that? You got that good job. And so if you want to do more, is to find that circle. And so just within the group itself, we have that circle in order to share kind of your next venture, what you're doing, what resources that you need, because somebody out there might actually have done it before. We had a great speaker last week that talked about kind of the house hacking. And so the ability to buy some of these multifamilies through a project, through like the NACA program. And so the ability to enter into home ownership without having the true cost of home ownership. And those are things that more than likely people didn't necessarily know years and years ago. But there are so many opportunities out there that we want to make sure that you're looking and open-minded and not saying, okay, I got to go in this linear kind of straightforward path. But there are other ways. And I think there are other communities out there that are figuring out that they're doing it. They are, I've definitely, unfortunately, I've done business with a number of companies and they're listed as women owned, and really it's not woman owned.
Yes, but they're taking advantage of the opportunities to secure capital.
And they understand that piece. And so we actually are. We actually are the demographic that they're trying to grow. But unfortunately, we're not going after these same opportunities. There are ways that we can supply our product to, whether it be the federal government, your local government, whether it be not-for-profit organizations or corporate organizations, because a lot of them right now are saying, we're going to do business with X amount or whatever percentage of minority businesses. Hold them accountable to it, but make sure that you're in a situation and take advantage of that as well.
2,000%.
So I am going to hand off for your final comments, and then we'll wait for any final questions that we have in the chat, so you all can drop those final questions as Marilyn has given us her final comments.
Well, let me just start out by saying again, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for the invitation, Rosalyn. I thoroughly enjoy seeing my sisters succeed. I am such a huge advocate in the corner. I'm like Issa Rae, who you rooting for? Everybody black.
Yes.
You know, I work in an industry where less than 2% of our advisors are Black. There is a hunger and a thirst. I can't tell you how many times my regional manager has said, where can we find more people? And what we're seeing in industry after industry, it's not that there is a lack of talent. It is that there is not the support structure that we see maybe other demographics get to help succeed within the organizations that we are in. But know this, you are enough, you have what you need, and in the words of Maya Angelou, even if you are the only one that looks like you in that room, you may come as one, but you stand as 10,000. And that means that others have paved the way. Our foremothers and our forefathers have shed blood, sweat, and tears for you to be here. So hold your head up high, have the confidence to know that you can, in fact, secure a financial and economic future for yourself and for your families. But it begins with you taking that first step, starting with your mindset around money. You know, a woman once said to me that money is magnetic and it is energy. If you think it and you conceive it, you will indeed manifest it. And so I don't want to get all eerie and spiritual on you, but I want you to know that what you think and believe is what will manifest in your life. And so if you start by saying, I am a money mogul, I am a money magnet, I can attract wealth into my life, I will attract wealth into my life, it gives you and it shifts the energy around you to be able to conspire to help you find the resources, find the partners, the advisors, the community, the opportunities that will work together to open those doors for you. But it all begins with you. You have to believe it and you have to craft your vision. And let me say this, write it down. It's not enough to have it swirling in your head. Write down your goals, write down your vision, build these vision boards, because once you do that, you're actually feeding it at a subconscious level. And by doing so, you begin to become that, and you will personify whatever perception you have of yourself. I'll end on this final thing. There's this saying that says, if you think you can or you can't, you're right. So with that, I'll take any final questions you have. But again, thank you so much for this lovely opportunity for us to get together and share space. I appreciate you, Rosalyn.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to say a few things that people have posted about this being inspiring. They said, thank you for sharing your insight and encouragement. And so someone just said, thank you, Marilyn. So I think just the receiving of the information is huge. Sometimes we know what we should be doing, but you got to hear it too. Yeah. So I think that is huge. I will reiterate some of the things that you said about honing into your resources, honing into your circles, creating that community of support. And I think that's huge because no one can do it all alone. Oftentimes we are looked at as the superwoman in every facet of our life, whether it be at home, whether it be with the rest of our family, whether it be in corporate America, whether it be in your business within itself. But everyone needs a circle in order to encourage you to bounce ideas off of, to find resources, maybe just to encourage you to take a break, whatever that might be. So encourage you to make sure that you're taking advantage of your circles. I'm going to also encourage you that if you need the services of a financial advisor with Merrill Lynch, Marilyn is available. I'm going to drop her information in the group after this as well. So feel free to check her out. She is located in Washington, D.C. area as well. So if you were in our area, we would love for you to reach out to Marilyn. We've definitely had some professionals kind of across the United States, but I'm in D.C., so a lot of my love for my D.C. people exists as as well. And then, as always, I want you to know that there are also resources through the Eureka platform. And so there are there's some great webinars that are coming up. Actually, I think one is on finding manufacturers. So that's a very big deal as well. So if you're trying to do more, if you remember our speaker maybe a month or so ago, that when we were talking about the T's, and I know a few of you all got the T's as well, one of the big things or the great things that she talked about is owning every part of the process. And so definitely if you're selling a product, so if you're selling dresses or earrings or whatever that is, and you want to be a part of the rest of the product or rest of the production and being able to control that, that's going to be a huge resource for you as well. So as usual, we'll drop the link so you can take advantage of that and make sure, once again, there are resources out there. Right now, we are in an unprecedented time that can definitely turn the tides in our favor. So as much as we possibly can, I just want to make sure that you know what's available to you, know that this community is available to you, and know that as much of the resources that I can find, that we can find, that you all are passing along to me as well, I'm going to share those with you. And so once again, I want to thank you, Marilyn.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much to the community overall, and we will see you all same time next Monday. Have a good one.
Thanks. Goodbye, everybody.